You descend into the hollows with dust in your lungs and echoes in your ears. The air carries the hush of forgotten minerals, and with each step you feel the slow heartbeat of something slumbering beneath. Not malicious, not ravenous, just waiting. The vein of Morith. The jagged cliffs spiral downward like the ribs of a buried colossus, and the black stone veins pulse faintly with forgotten memories. This is where he began, not as Darth Vectivus, but as a man named Ryan Talavar, walking the creaking platforms of a mining colony with numbers in his mind and silence in his soul. You walk his footsteps now. The force here is not violent. It does not scream or pull or demand. It breathes. It pulses in the obsidian. It watches. And Ryan, too, had watched, not for power, but for pattern. He came not as a seeker of thrones, but of balance. He observed the workers' toil, their spirits, dimming beneath the Everdark, and he wondered why the world beneath their feet felt more alive than those who walked above it. He was not born to darkness, nor seduced by it. He courted it gently, like a lover unafraid of the scars. You trace a path where miners once laughed, once cursed. You can hear it faintly, like mist in your memory, the sound of pickaxes, the collapse of rock, the laughter before it faded. The colony was not cursed. The darkness did not consume them. It merely reflected them. Ryan built the colony with his mind, meticulous, mathematical, quiet. He learned the slope of each tunnel like a poem. But it was not the stones that whispered. First, it was the crystals, veins of shimmering black glass, humming with something more than mineral, something sentient. Something that spoke in symbols and suggestion. You place your hand on the stone. It is warm, and you begin to remember. There were nights Ryan stood alone with the crystals, unmoving for hours, as if waiting for permission to speak. They responded not to dominance, but to presence. And slowly, he began to feel what others did not. The vibration behind thought, the echo behind emotion. The force here was not a sword or a storm. It was a mirror. When Ryan meditated beneath the earth, visions came not in fire, but in geometry, spirals, fractals, equations made of meaning. He did not fear them, he mapped them. You see his notes now, sketched in rusted pages behind your eyelids, diagrams of how light folded into silence, not spells, not rituals, interpretations. The darkness was never corrupting, it was clarifying. It showed him the distortion in all things. It showed him that fear and peace were neighbors in the same hallway. And so began his transformation, not dramatic, not violent, subtle, like water smoothing stone. He did not change names overnight. He did not raise temples. He simply listened, more deeply than anyone ever had. And the force, sensing something in him that would not bend toward destruction, offered secrets instead of seductions. You kneel by the old rails where carts once rattled. You see the imprint of a boot heel, long fossilized in soot and crystal. Dust his boot. Ryan was not alone for long. Others came, not disciples, but visitors, philosophers, mystics, even Jedi, once curious about the strange neutrality of this place. Why did the dark side not swallow this colony whole? Why did the light not burn it away? Because, you understand now, it was neither. It was balance. A breath held in the lungs of the galaxy. He spoke with them, not as a Sith Lord, but as a man who had simply asked better questions. What if the Force does not want to be divided? He asked a robed wanderer once. What if it merely wants to be seen? They did not always understand, but they remembered him, and those who stayed did not call him master. They called him listener. You walk deeper into the shaft where his first vision came. The walls shimmer subtly, not with magic, but memory. Here he saw an ancient figure in the stone, not a ghost, not a god, but a mirror of himself, older, wiser, drenched in shadow, yet unafraid. You do not have to be cruel to be strong, the figure whispered. It was the first time he felt the dark side and did not flinch. You kneel where he once knelt, and you begin to understand. Vectivus was not born of hatred. He was born of clarity. He did not demand servitude. He taught self-awareness. His strength was restraint. His legacy, a contradiction. A Sith Lord who never conquered. A shadow who brought no storm. He did not collect apprentices like weapons. He invited minds to wander beside him, to question the code, the cycle, the myth, and so this place became sanctuary, not because of wards or weapons, but because it was aligned with him, with the force, with the truth behind polarity. You rise now, heart slower, breath softer. You sense the crystals quiet once more. They have shown you the beginning, not of power, but of presence, and as you return toward the mouth of the cave, you hear his voice, soft, rational, unshaken. There is no chaos here, only depth. And so you leave, not with answers, but with resonance. A feeling that the force is not done speaking, only waiting, just like the crystals, just like him, just like you. You walk toward the twilight, and the path ahead unfolds like a spiral, not a rise, a return. You return not as a visitor, but as someone altered. The tunnels no longer hum with strangeness, they breathe with recognition. And you, too, have begun to breathe differently. The darkness that once watched you now walks beside you, silent and unthreatening, a companion made of shadow and patience. This is how he lived, how he moved through the days, not with dominance, but with discernment. Ryan Talavar, the man who became Darth Vectivus, was not tempted by the fury of the Sith, nor drawn by the sanctity of the Jedi. He saw both as incomplete equations, where the Jedi severed desire and the Sith fed it endlessly. Vectivus studied it, touched it gently, questioned its rhythm. His power came not from force, but from understanding. Within the colony, life began to bend around his presence. Workers no longer feared the shifts below the earth. They felt safe not because he protected them like a lord, but because he walked among them like a scholar. He did not lecture, but listened. He did not preach, but posed questions. Have you ever felt the force settle instead of swell? He once asked a technician repairing a gravelft, as if it wants nothing from you. The technician could not answer, but he never forgot the question. And so the legend grew not as flame, but as fog, curling through the stories of those who passed through. Visitors from across the stars came to feel what could not be explained. Jedi, Sith, merchants, poets, all drawn by rumors of a place where the dark side did not twist, but revealed. Vectivus welcomed them without fanfare. There were no guards, no declarations, only questions offered in quiet. He believed the Force was not a war, but a mirror. And mirrors, he often said, do not choose what they reflect, they simply show. You walk now into one of his oldest meditation chambers, carved not with symbols of allegiance, but with spirals and curves, paths that loop without end, tracing thought without conclusion. The air here does not hum, it listens, and you, now shaped by what you've seen, begin to listen to in this chamber. Vectivus spent years in contemplation, not seeking visions, but watching their absence. He was fascinated by stillness, by what emerged when ambition ceased. In one journal etched into stone, he wrote, "The force is clearest, not when I strive, but when I yield." He did not mean surrender in the Jedi sense, nor domination in the Sith sense. He meant yielding as one yields to a symphony, allowing the music to pass through without grabbing it. The crystals surrounding this chamber glow faintly with memory. You sit, time has not erased his shape from it. He believed the force was not a path, but a pool deep, reflective, and silent. He called it the still dark, a place within the self where all masks fall and only intention remains. And he taught that every being, regardless of alignment, carried that stillness. To reach it was not to abandon feeling, but to name it without flinching. Anger, joy, fear, which one? A doorway, but never a master. And so he trained few, but guided many. He left no holocrons filled with rage, no tombs forged in torment. Only writings, thoughts, reflections that shimmered not with threat, but with depth. You read now from a passage carved into the wall, a thought he returned too often. True darkness does not scream, it listens, it reveals, it asks you whether you are brave enough to see yourself, and you pause, the echo settling into your ribs. Vectivus lived not to shape the galaxy, but to study it. His home was not a fortress, but a sanctuary for paradox. Here, Sith and Jedi could speak without blades. Here, the Force could show itself without choosing sides. He once hosted a Jedi master named Selen Vora, who arrived with suspicion and left in silence. They had spoken for days, walking the tunnels, and debating not who was right, but what was. Hidden at the end, Vectivus asked her, "What do you see in me?" And she said, "A man who carries the dark like a lantern, not a sword." She never returned. But years later, when her apprentice passed this way, he found her journal hidden beneath the stone. In it, she wrote, "He frightened me, not because of what he was, but because of what he wasn't. He made me see that we have never understood the Force, only its shadows." You stand now in the corridor where those conversations echoed. The stone remembers everything. So do you. In this place, Vectivus constructed his legacy, not through power, but precision. His teachings were scattered in moments and shared silences, in strange dreams, in the way he asked, "What are you feeling right now?" Not as challenge, but invitation. And perhaps that was his truest gift, to make others feel seen, not used. Many feared him, but none hated him. His apprentices, few though they were, did not seek war. They sought understanding. They left, build sanctuaries of their own places where the Force could be contemplated, not weaponized. Vectivus never forbade emotion. He simply asked that it be honored, not obeyed. And as you walk through the last chamber of this section, you realize something rare. He was not tragic. He did not fall. He did not burn. He chose to walk into shadow without dissolving. He remained whole. And in a galaxy of fractured myths, his wholeness became a riddle too gentle for war to answer. You reach a threshold, now a vast doorway, shaped not by stone, but by resonance. The Force here is soft, deep, knowing. And as you pass through it, You do not feel burdened, you feel heard. The path ahead does not promise conquest, it offers clarity. And as the walls close behind you, the crystals pulse once more, not in warning, but in welcome. You have not come to defeat darkness, you have come to understand it, and in doing so, you walk not behind Vectivus, but beside him, through quiet, through patience, through the still dark, through yourself. You awaken into the hush of a deeper realm, the kind of silence that does not wait to be filled, but reveals what was always there. The path has narrowed now, not in danger, but in purpose. You are no longer exploring, you are remembering. The tunnels are no longer tunnels, they are questions curved, coiled, and carved by time. Darth Vectivus is not a myth you chase, but a presence you carry. His teachings are no longer words on stone, but pulses in your breath. And you realize that this journey has never been about understanding him. It has always been about understanding the force through a mind that refused to bend it. The final chamber is not grand, it is quiet, round, like the inside of a whisper. The walls are smooth obsidian, veins of crystal webbing through the darkness, like constellations etched into black sky. You cross the threshold, not with reverence, but recognition. This was his end, not as a retreat, but as a choice. Vec knew when to step back, not because he feared death, but because he had nothing more to prove. He had seen what ambition could do, and he had let go of the hunger that devoured others. He left behind no monuments, no empire, no pyramid of bones, just peace. And in that peace, a challenge greater than conquest, restraint. You move slowly, sensing how the force thickens, here not heavy, but deep, like a still lake with galaxies folded beneath its surface. You hear nothing, and yet everything feels spoken. This is where he meditated for the last time, not in despair, not in regret, but in fullness. The legends say Vectivus died as he lived surrounded by those who loved him. Students and friends who understood that power was not purpose, that knowledge was not weapon, that legacy was not domination. His apprentices did not inherit his name, they inherited his balance. And when he passed, the crystals in the chamber dimmed only slightly, as if they too had closed their eyes in rest. You sit now where he once sat, in the center of a perfect circle. The stones beneath you are warm, despite the depth, and in that warmth, not into pieces, but into clarity. You see flashes, not visions, but feelings. The way he smiled when he solved a paradox, the way he tilted his head when someone lied gently, the way he breathed when silence arrived. He was not a flame, he was not a storm, he was gravity. He drew things into stillness, and there, in stillness, he let them become themselves. The galaxy never understood him. How could it? A Sith Lord with no wars, a wielder of darkness with no scars. A master who encouraged doubt, who offered no loyalty oaths, who welcomed Jedi into his sanctuary without drawing a blade. To the rest of the galaxy, he was anomaly. To those who walked these tunnels, he was mirror. And now you, too, are reflected. You feel your assumptions dissolve. You see that power does not require cruelty, that darkness does not demand corruption, that identity is not forged in defiance, but in stillness. The force here is not divided, it is whole. It does not pull you left or right. It simply surrounds. It simply listens. You recall his final teaching, etched faintly into the stone, not to be recited, but felt. I walked into the shadow, not to hide, but to see. And what I saw did not frighten me, it freed me. These words do not rise like proclamation. They drift like ash, gentle, final, honest. And you wonder how many others have sat here, wondering if their anger was ever necessary, if their vows ever meant what they hoped. The force, in its vastness, says nothing. And in that nothing, you begin to hear everything. You rise, not because the journey is done, but because the silence has finished its turn. You carry no answers, only awareness. Vectivus would have approved. He never offered answers, he offered space. And now, that space lives in you. You look back once, the chamber dark and gentle behind you, and then forward into the mine that is no longer a mine, but a passage, through self, through shadow, through stillness. You are not who you were when you arrived. You are not meant to be. For Vectivus did not teach transformation. He taught return, return to the self, beneath all titles, return to the force, beneath all divisions, return to the breath, the silence, the choice. And so you walk, not with fear, not with fire, but with fullness. You step beyond the mine and feel the galaxy tilt subtly, like a thought changing direction mid-sentence. The world outside is loud again, full of ships and signals of orders barked and loyalties declared. But you are not the same as when you first descended into the dark. You carry something now, a stillness that resists the storm. And in that stillness, the memory of him walks beside you. Darth Vectivus, neither savior nor tyrant, but something harder to define. A lord, yes, but not of armies or fear. A lord of inner architecture. A sovereign of the unseen. He did not rise through battle. He did not ascend through betrayal. He chose his name not to conquer, but to claim. In the tradition of the Sith, names are rebirths, explosions of identity forged in conflict, but Vectivus chose his name in solitude, away from the temples and the blood. He chose it not to erase Ryan Talavar, but to distill him, to become not more, but more exact. The name Vectivus was not a banner, it was a question he asked the Force and himself every day. Can one master darkness without being mastered by it? You walk through the archives, now holograms flickering like fireflies across aged stone. This was his sanctuary, the chamber where ideas lived longer than empires. No guards, no alarms, just layers of thought folded like sediment. His writings speak softly in your ears, activated by your presence, as if they too have been waiting. The storm does not need to be obeyed. He once wrote, it needs to be studied, sat with, understood. Then it calms, or you do. There is no roar in his philosophy, only gravity, a draw inward. His contemporaries called him weak, passive, a shadow of what a Sith should be. But Vectivus never corrected them. He knew the power of being underestimated. He knew the allure of silence in a world addicted to noise, where others shouted their truths. He whispered his questions. And when they dismissed him, he smiled, because power, to him, was not the ability to break. It was the ability not to need to. You descend a spiral corridor lined with lightless sconces. No flame ever burned, here only memory. These were the quarters of his guests, thinkers, force sensitives, even exiled Sith lords who had grown tired of war. Vectivus offered them no allegiance, only space. They came with their wounds and left with mirrors. He gave them no answers, only their own. Thoughts echoed back more clearly. He believed every being was a poem half forgotten by itself, and his role was not to edit but to remember. In a galaxy that worshipped conflict, his stillness was mistaken for stagnation, but he moved through time like a current beneath ice low, powerful, shaping everything without needing to be seen. He did not fight the Jedi because he saw their blind spots mirrored in the Sith. Both feared desire. One sought to deny it, the other to devour it. Vectivus studied it, listened to its origins. He traced anger to its child form hurt. He followed ambition back to loneliness. He peeled every passion until he found the wound it sprouted from. And in that wound, he did not plant weapons. He planted observation. The Sith code, to him, was not scripture. It was a riddle. Peace is a lie. The code begins. But Vectivus asked, what if peace is not a lie, but simply misunderstood? What if peace is not the absence of emotion, but the awareness of it? His days were spent unraveling language, questioning symbols others swore by. He was not a blasphemer. He was a deeper believer of balance, of synthesis, of an unpolarized force. You feel his presence in the floor beneath your feet, not as ghost, but as echo. His teachings do not command, they invite, and now, standing before the great glass mural in his hall of reflection, you begin to see what he saw. The mural shifts. As you look, midges flowing like dreams. A Jedi raising a saber with doubt in her heart. A Sith kneeling alone after victory. A child sensing the Force for the first time and laughing instead of fearing. These are not allegories. They are truths, without hierarchy. Vectivus believed the Force played no favorites. Only people did. He had a friend, once Master Dovar Tembe, a former Jedi who renounced the Order after seeing a temple boy punished for crying at a funeral. Tem came to Vectivus, not in search of revenge, but relief, and he found it in long walks across the obsidian dunes, in conversations that wandered like wind through hollow stone, in quiet meals where nothing needed to be solved. Vectivus gave him no new code, only permission to feel again. And in that, Tem rediscovered his own voice. He left with no title, no mission, just peace. A kind of peace the Orders had forgotten how to hold. You realize now why Vectivus was dangerous, not because of what he did, but because of what he disproved. He existed. He endured. He wielded the dark and was not devoured. His very life was a challenge to the myth of necessary corruption. And myths, when threatened, become violent. But Vectivus never struck back. He wrote, he taught, he dissolved, instead of divided. When others tried to provoke him, he would offer tea or a question, never war. He once said, I am not a ripple in the Force. I am the stillness into which ripples fall. You whisper that now, the words vibrating through the crystal table beside you. You understand. He did not live in opposition to chaos. He made chaos feel seen, and in that gaze, it softened. And now, in the final gallery, you find a chamber filled with fragments objects left by those who passed through. A mask, a journal, a child's drawing of 2 moons over the mines. None of it sacred, all of it sacred. Vectivus kept nothing for power, but preserved everything for meaning. These were lives, not artifacts. and you are part of that continuity. Now, you sit, breathing slowly, not meditating, but remembering. The room adjusts to your silence. Light recedes, your heartbeat slows, and the Force leans in, not to test, but to witness. You have stepped into the legacy of a lord who needed no empire, who ruled not by force, but by presence. And in this presence, you dissolve not into loss, but into return. Return to the soft edge of the storm. Return to the breath beneath ambition. Return to the version of you that no longer seeks to win, but to understand. The mural dims. The chamber breathes, and so do you. You remain seated in the hush of the chamber, and time begins to stretch, no longer a straight line, but a soft spiral that folds in on itself. The objects around you seem to shimmer with invisible threads, connecting stories that never shouted, only whispered. This was the power of Darth Vectivus, not in lightning, not in legions, but in the way his memory shaped the air around it. Even now, long after his voice has faded from the galaxy, his presence does not cling. It simply lingers, like dust caught in twilight. You close your eyes and feel the pulse of his philosophy move through you, not as doctrine, but as breath. He was not the kind of Sith who gathered followers through terror or charisma. He offered nothing but clarity. And in that clarity, others found themselves. They say his sanctuary grew, not by design, but by quiet gravity. One came, then another, scholars, pilgrims, tired warriors. He never advertised, never summoned. He allowed, and in that allowing a kind of community took shape, one not of hierarchy or creed, but of listening. Vectivus called them echoes, not because they followed, but because they resonated. They brought their experiences, their contradictions, and he met them not with answers, but reflection. It was said that even the crystals in the walls adjusted their frequency to match the emotional resonance of the visitors. Harmony was not imposed, it was invited. You walk now along the corridor of contemplations, where his reflections were etched into long, spiraling bands of stone. Each etching was placed in a curve, so that no thought could be read in a single glance. You had to move with the wall, follow the bend, walk beside the idea. Conflict, one reads, is often a misunderstanding disguised as principle. Another, power does not corrupt. It reveals what you hoped to hide. And then this, to lead is not to gather others beneath you, but to illuminate a path they may not yet see. You walk slowly, letting each sentence settle like rain into dry soil. This is not a corridor of revelation. It is a mirror maze, each line refracting your own thoughts back at you. Vectivus refused to simplify the Force into binary terms. He did not speak of light and dark as opposites, but as perspectives tools through which perception shaped reality. He believed the Force was not divided, only misunderstood. The light fears pain, he once wrote. The dark fears stillness, but the Force fears nothing. It simply is. In the center of this philosophy was the radical idea that one could embrace the dark without falling, just as one could follow the light and still be blind. His was not a call to abandon either path, but to weave them, not to unify through domination, but through understanding. You descend now into the atrium of spirals, a chamber shaped like the inside of a nautilus shell, winding inward until it disappears into quiet. This was where Vectivus taught not by standing above, but by sitting beside. The seating was circular, the air always gently humming. Students, if they could be called, that spoke more than he did. They asked, confessed, reflected, and he listened, offering thoughts only when silence had done its work. Here, the force was not wielded, it was wondered. No one dueled, no one bowed, they simply explored together. He once welcomed a night sister into this room, her hands still raw. From battle magic, she expected judgment. She found none. Vectivus asked her, "What did it cost you to cast that spell?" And when she wept, he offered no comfort, only the space to feel. She stayed for months, not to change her ways, but to understand them. When she left, she carved a message into the wall. "This man held my rage and did not flinch. In his stillness, I dissolved." That carving still glows softly now as you pass it, etched in a language older than basic, yet known to your body. Vectivus was not concerned with legacy. He did not crave remembrance. His writings were often unsigned, his chambers unmarked. If you found his teachings, he believed, it was because you needed them, not because he needed to be known. He understood the ego's seduction, especially among the Sith. To resist it was not to kill the self, but to disarm it. "The ego is a mask," he said once, "and masks are useful, but dangerous when mistaken for skin." His humility was not performance, it was presence, a complete acceptance of what was, without the need to conquer or conceal it. You pause before a stone table where 3 artifacts lie: a cracked kyber shard, a weathered datapad, and a child's hand-drawn map. Of the mind tunnels, they are not relics, they are stories. The shard belonged to a Jedi who left her saber behind to stay here a while, choosing clarity over combat. The datapad contains a poem about silence, unsigned but clearly his poem, and the map drawn by a boy whose father worked the mines, who once asked Vectivus what the Force tasted like. "Like memory," he answered. The boy smiled and never forgot. In this sanctuary, the Force was not dramatic. It did not thunder. It folded into daily life, into conversations, shared meals, quiet moments. One visitor wrote, "He made the Force feel less like a storm and more like a song I'd forgotten the words to." And in that music, Vectivus found his strength, not in opposition, not in victory, but in the refusal to disappear into either. Now, in the deeper spiral of the chamber, you sit once more. The walls lean inward, curving gently, like the arms of a thought embracing itself. There is no light, yet you are not in darkness. The Force here is soft, surrounding, without boundary. You feel your breath slow. You feel yourself become porous. You understand that power is not something to grasp, but something to align with. That clarity is not what you see, but how you look. And in that realization, you meet Vectivus not as a figure, but as a resonance, a frequency beneath the noise, a shape in the quiet. He chose stillness, not because he lacked power, but because he had seen what power without presence becomes. He had walked among shadows and never let them own his steps. And now you, too, feel that path beneath your feet, not one of glory or fall, but of return. A return to the self before division. A return to the Force before fear. You rise slowly. You carry nothing, and yet you feel full. This is what he left behind. Not doctrine, not empire, but stillness. A stillness that echoes in you now. You walk now through the last corridor of memory, where the spiral ends, not in a chamber, but in a windowless well of quiet, the place where Darth Vectivus laid down his final thoughts. There is no tomb here, no monument, only a chair, simple and unadorned, facing a stone wall into which nothing is carved. It is not emptiness, it is completion. The space he left behind holds no weight, and yet you feel its gravity in your chest. This was where he sat when he stopped speaking, not because he ran out of words, but because the silence had taught him everything else. You feel it now, the quiet that is not the absence of sound, but the fullness of understanding. The air here bends slightly around you, as if memory itself leans close to see who has arrived. There are no footsteps to follow anymore, no relics left behind. His students dispersed long ago, not with banners or vows, but with a clarity they could not explain. They carried no teachings, only presence, and the galaxy, so addicted to noise, barely noticed their passing. That was the way he wanted it. Vectivus never sought immortality through fear or war. He dissolved into the mythic fabric by not clinging to it. His legacy lives not in temples or texts, but in people who learned to listen more deeply, question more gently, feel more completely. You are one of them now, not because you choose to be, but because, in your silence, you already are. You sit in the chair and close your eyes. You expect a voice, a vision, a message from beyond. But none comes, and still you are not alone. You feel the force the way he must have felt. It's subtle, layered, not calling for action, but for attention. It is no longer dark or light. It is a river without banks, a breath without sound, the memory of the force before it was named. You do not try to shape it. You let it move through you, and in doing so, you understand. Vectivus did not reject the Sith. He refined them. He did not oppose the Jedi. He clarified them. He saw that both orders had turned the Force into a tool. He sought to remember that it was first a truth. You walk once more through the sanctuary, not as a guest, but as its newest silence. The murals no longer shift, the rooms no longer pulse. You are no longer being shown, you are simply being, and in that stillness, you feel the force settle around you, like water finding its shape. The tension in your limbs fades. The questions that once buzzed behind your eyes fall away. There is no lesson here, only permission to stop striving, to begin seeing, to allow the universe to speak in the voice beneath your own. The stories told of Vectivus speak of contradictions, a Sith Lord who lived in peace, a wielder of the dark who caused no suffering. Many refused to believe he existed. Others tried to erase his name from archives, fearing what his truth implied, that power could be calm, that darkness could be whole, that the Force did not require sacrifice, only sincerity. But he never cared whether he was remembered. He once wrote, "If I am forgotten, may it be because peace endured." And in that sentence, he vanished more completely than any Sith before him. You now understand why his teachings could never become doctrine. They had no beginning, no command. They were invitations. They asked you to feel, to pause, to see, and they could only live in those who were willing to step out of the storm. You remember the path now, not with your mind, but with your body. Every footfall through the mine, every question carved into the spirals, every silence that welcomed you instead of judged you. And as you walk again toward the outer chambers, you carry none of it as weight, only as warmth. There are no guardians here, no tests to prove you worthy. Only the question, are you willing to see without needing to define? That was always his threshold. And you, without realizing it, have passed through it. You are no longer seeking Vectivus. You are walking with him through each breath you take without anger. Each moment you resist the hunger to control. Each silence you hold without fear. He is not behind you. He is not ahead. He is beside you now, not as ghost, but as frequency. A presence that echoes through your awareness. Calm and whole, you return to the outer chamber. The stars have shifted since you first arrived, but the air is still untouched by time. You sit once more beneath the arch that frames the void, and in that void, you no longer see emptiness. You see space, possibility, rest. You exhale, and for the first time, the galaxy feels silent enough to hear your breath. You do not rise. You do not prepare to leave. You are already where you were always meant to arrive, not in knowledge, but in knowing. This is how his story ends, not with defeat, not with triumph, but with continuation, not as a warning, not as an example, but as an option, a possibility that the Force is not at war, that perhaps it never was, that perhaps the only storm was the one we brought with us. And that peace, real peace, begins not with answers, but with attention. So you remain, breathing, listening, not seeking, just being, like he did, like the Force does, like the silence always has. You descend again, though this time not into stone, but into thought. The spiral path before you is not carved by hands or machines, but by memory that coils through dimensions, long buried beneath language. The mine has faded behind you, and with it the story of stillness. But not all darkness is calm. Not all silence is soothing. There are depths in the Force that whisper not to teach, but to tempt. And you, drawn forward by something older than curiosity, step into that murmur. The air is thin, as if reality forgets itself here, and the crystals begin to sing not in notes, but in sensation. They vibrate through your blood, not asking you to follow, but daring you to feel. This is the place Vectivus once called the abyss between meanings, a hollowed chamber within a dead moon, far from the colony he built, far even from those who knew his name. Few ever found it, fewer left. Here he did not teach, he did not write, he listened to the crystals, to the abyss, to the questions that could never be answered aloud. You walk into the chamber slowly, your body already responding to the pull of the stones. They are not like those in the mine. These are alive in another way, sharp-edged, irregular, refracting light that isn't there. They are not attuned to you. They are interrogating you. Vectivus came here only once each cycle, alone, cloaked not in armor but in honesty. He believed that the Force did not divide reality into good and evil, but that certain places made you choose who you were without excuse. This abyss did not accept theories. It devoured rationalization, and the crystals, these jagged witnesses, to eternity offered only one gift, reflection stripped of comfort. You kneel beside one now, and it pulses faintly, as if recognizing a traveler foolish enough to stop pretending. He called them ethical echoes, these stones that hummed with emotional residue, not dark in nature, but intense, the kind of energy left behind when someone makes a choice they cannot undo. The chamber is filled with them shards of memory, encased in vibration. Here Vectivus meditated not on peace, but on pain, not to dwell in it, but to understand its mechanics. He believed that if the Sith ever had a flaw deeper than ambition, it was the refusal to feel regret. And so he came here, where regret never died, only echoed, where remorse became a mirror so clear it burned. You press your palm to the largest crystal, and a tremor moves through your rib cage. You see images, not visions, but impressions. A father closing a door he cannot reopen. A child holding a saber she will later bury in guilt. A Jedi standing silent as a friend falls. The stone does not judge these choices, but it remembers how they felt. And in that remembering, it shows you not what was done but why. You shiver, not in fear, but in exposure. There are no walls between you and your own darkness now. Vectivus came to this place not to purge himself, but to sit beside his own shadow. He once wrote, "If you cannot love the part of you that failed, you do not yet know who you are." He did not believe in absolution. He believed in accountability, and that belief shaped everything. Here, in the abyss, he faced the memory of every moment he turned away from empathy, not to flagellate himself, but to understand the shape of the wound, because he knew that wounds denied become weapons, and he refused to carry weapons he did not name. The ethics of the abyss are not written in codes. They are carved in consequence. One crystal holds the grief of a mother who fled war only to train her son in silence. Another hums with the betrayal of a healer who poisoned to save thousands. There are no answers here, only complexity. Welcomed that complexity. He drank it like bitter tea, and in doing so became immune to the kind of clarity that blinds. You sit among the crystals now, each one singing its own dissonant truth, and you realize that this chamber is not about morality, it is about awareness. In the rest of the galaxy, ethics are shaped by fear of punishment, of exile, of pain. But here, Vectivus saw pain not as punishment, but as instruction. Each regret a teacher, each wound a doorway. He did not seek to erase the past. He studied it, line by line, feeling where the force shifted when choice met consequence. You reach out and touch another shard, and it pulses faster, sharper. You see a Sith apprentice striking in fear, not hatred. You feel her heart break, even as her blade connects. The moment freezes, the vibration settles, and you feel yourself sob without sound. This is what the crystals do. They make you feel what others could not say. They teach empathy not as softness, but as sword. Vectivus once said, "Compassion is not weakness. It is control born from comprehension." He did not flinch from pain. He folded it into his awareness until it had no power left to twist him. In this chamber, you begin to do the same, slowly, not with courage, but with honesty. You let the ache in. You stop trying to redeem it. You simply witness, and in that witnessing, something dissolves, not guilt, but the illusion of separation. You see now why Vectivus never called this place sacred. Sacred implies safety, and this chamber offers none. It demands only truth, and truth, he believed, not the dark, but the truth between them, waiting in the abyss. As you rise, the crystals hum in unison, not in approval, but in rhythm. You have not conquered anything. You have not passed a test. you have simply remained present. That is all they ever asked. That is all he ever asked. The Force does not require purity, only presence. You step back toward the spiral that led you here, the sounds of memory still clinging to your skin. The chamber does not close behind you. It has no doors. It is always open for those willing to feel without fleeing. And you, now shaped by pain, you do not carry something heavier than power. You carry understanding, the kind that Vectivus built his stillness upon, the kind that does not shine but hums. You emerge from the abyss with echoes still vibrating behind your ribs, like threads of unfinished songs. The silence clings to you, not empty, but full of voices that do not scream, only resonate. The air beyond feels lighter, but you are heavier now, not with burden, but with depth. You walk slower, you listen more carefully, for in the presence of those stones, you did not learn something new. You remembered what had always been buried beneath your explanations. And now, as your path leads you toward a new structure, part observatory, part sanctum, you begin to feel the breadth of Vectivus's design. He was not building a legacy. He was constructing an ecosystem of awareness. Each chamber, each space, not meant to inform you but to awaken something already inside you. This observatory was never meant to track stars. The ceiling opens to the void, yes, but not to measure it. This was where Vectivus sat and reflected on consequence, not concept, but as vibration. He called it a theory that every decision, however quiet, created a resonance through the force that could not be erased. He believed that nothing was truly forgotten, that the Force remembered everything, even when we didn't. And in this room, he would sit for hours, tuning his awareness to those distant reverberations. You feel them now, not as words, but as feelings too old for language. The remorse of worlds, the laughter of vanished species, the tension of a choice that was almost made but wasn't. They drift through you like ancestral winds, and you understand that the Force is not just a current, it is a memory without end. Vectivus did not fear these echoes. He welcomed them, because to him, ethics was not about rule or reward. It was about resonance. How did your choices hum through time? Did they distort? Did they clarify? Were you brave enough to feel what your actions truly caused? Most were not, even among Jedi. The temptation to frame every act as righteous overwhelmed the humility needed to perceive its true impact. Vectivus trained himself toward those willing to feel beyond the immediate, to hear the aftertones of a moment long after it had passed. And so he lived carefully, not in fear, but in reverence for consequence. You sit in the observatory now, and the sky above seems to pulse with unseen chords, not stars, not planets, just frequencies made of choice. You think of your own life, the acts you deemed small, the intentions you never voiced, and you realize that the Force holds them all. It does not judge, it remembers, it reflects, and in that reflection, you are asked not to atone, but to feel. That, to Vectivus, was the only real act of power, to feel fully and still remain whole, to absorb complexity without collapsing into chaos or denial. He once wrote, "The abyss shows you what you have done. The echo shows you what it became." That echo, he said, was where the Force truly lived, not in the doing, but in the unfolding. And so he cultivated patience, not as passivity, but as power withheld, until understanding matured. He taught that reaction was the enemy of wisdom, that only when you could feel the long echo of your own voice could you speak with clarity. You look around the circular room now and see no screens, no instruments, only suspended crystals, each tuned to a different resonance. Some are calm, some ache, some shiver faintly, as if still haunted. You realize each one is a memory of someone who sat here and listened without resistance. You rise and walk the corridor that spirals outward from the observatory. This path leads you into a new chamber, warm, quiet, filled with soft green light. A garden, but not of plants, of memory. Vectivus called this place the Garden of Unmade Things. It was here he reflected, not on what he did, but what he chose not to do. It was a sacred refusal. He believed restraint was not emptiness, but intention. You walk among small pedestals, each holding nothing but a single carved phrase. The blade I did not raise, the secret I did not reveal, the anger I did not answer, the power I did not claim. Each one pulses gently with a subtle hum, as if the force acknowledges what was withheld with as much gravity as what was done. This was the heart of his ethics, not silence for its own sake, but silence as a stand. He believed the galaxy was obsessed with action, addicted to impact. But impact without introspection, he said, was merely noise. Here, in this garden, he cultivated the discipline of choosing not to act, not from fear, but from vision. He taught that restraint, when rooted in awareness, was a kind of truth-telling, a refusal to create more distortion. You kneel before one pedestal and place your hand over the empty surface. You feel it, the ripple of a choice never made, the softness of a consequence never born. And you understand that peace is not always what you bring. Sometimes it is what you refuse to unleash. Vectivus did not see the force as destiny. He saw it as conversation, a dialogue between will and world. He believed that every act altered the conversation. Every pause reshaped its tone. And so he trained himself to speak sparingly, to act with precision, to choose the spaces between impulse and impact. He once said, "The abyss teaches you what you can do. The echo teaches you what you have done. The garden teaches you what you might have." These three chambers, biz, echo, garden, were not just reflections of himself. They were aspects of the force, not as divided truths, but as layers of comprehension. You walk now toward the last curve of this spiral. A small alcove appears, where a single chair faces a blank wall, and etched above it, "Here I listened to the silence that did not need me." This was where Vectivus ended each cycle. After the crystals, after the echoes, after the garden, he sat here doing nothing, becoming nothing, letting the force speak without his shaping. This, he believed, was the final ethic, the courage to not intervene, the willingness to let the force reveal itself on its own terms. You sit in that chair, and the air folds around you like memory returning home. You are not asked to do, only to feel, only to allow. And as you sit, the force begins to hum, not loudly, but deeply, not to command, but to witness. You are part of it now, not through action, but through attention. The crystals behind you, the echoes above you, the garden within you, you carry them all, not as burden, but as awareness. And in that awareness, you become what Vectivus always was, not a wielder of the force, but its listener, You remain in the chair long after the last echo fades, not because you are waiting for something, but because nothing needs to arrive. The force is not a visitor here. It is the room itself. It is the breath you didn't notice, the warmth in your chest that is not heat but presence. And as you sit in this final chamber of memory, you understand what Vectivus meant when he said, "The deepest truths of the force are not spoken, they are endured." This stillness is not absence, it is containment. The garden, the observatory, the abyss, they have emptied you not of feeling, but of resistance. You feel now without condition, you listen without seeking, and that, you realize, is the true threshold between power and peace. Vectivus did not build temples. He built questions, structures shaped like spirals, like echoes, like the breath drawn in before a word is spoken. He shaped stone to remind you that the force is not an instruction, it is an inquiry. And each person who walked through these halls was not given a lesson, but a mirror. In the abyss, they met the pain they would not name. In the echo, they heard the consequence they could not erase. And in the garden, they saw the mercy of inaction. This trinity was his doctrine, not to be followed, but to be walked, not to teach control, but clarity. You stand now, and the chamber opens before you not with doors, but with breath. There is no boundary between you and the memory of him. Vectivus lives here, not in ghostly form, but in the resonance of his restraint. He does not appear, he does not speak. But the room bends slightly, as if acknowledging that another has heard what must be carried forward in silence. You walk without sound. The hallway ahead is narrow, then wide, then disappears altogether into a space that is not lit, but gently aglow. There, at the center, stands a single objectosphere of glass, suspended without support, humming faintly, like a distant thought trying to be remembered. This is the last artifact he ever created, not a weapon, not a code, a resonance chamber, tuned to the unspoken moments between choices. It contains no image, no sound, only sensation. You reach toward it, and your fingers tingle before they even touch. You see moments from your own life flicker inside you, decisions long buried, feelings you never voiced, silences you misinterpreted as peace. And still, the sphere does not judge, it reflects. This is what he left behind, not a legacy of obedience, but of observation. You remember now that Vectivus did not seek to reform the Sith. He did not seek to merge them with the Jedi. He sought to remind the galaxy that the Force, at its most honest, is not divided. It is vast, it is quiet, it is an ocean too large for any creed to contain. And in that ocean, ethics are not law, they are awareness, they are courage. They are the slow, endless practice of choosing not just what you can do, but what you are willing to become by doing it. You press your palm to the sphere, and a warmth moves through you, not invasive, not directive, but acknowledging. It is the kind of warmth that says, "Yes, I see you." You close your eyes, and for a long time, nothing happens. Or perhaps everything does. You feel old versions of yourself loosening. You feel intentions realign. You feel griefs unknotted, not resolved, but seen. Not the return to innocence, the return to attention, to presence, to the self before ambition distorted it. The self that could feel without drowning. The self that could choose without seeking applause. And so, when he died, it was not in darkness or light. It was in quiet. surrounded by the resonance of his own restraint. The crystals did not dim, the abyss did not close, the force did not scream. It merely exhaled, and in that exhale, a life passed gently into the current. You open your eyes. The chamber is as it was. The sphere still hums, but something within you has softened, not because a truth was given, but because the hunger for one has gone. You walk now through the final corridor, one hand grazing the walls, each step a breath. There are no parting words, no carved mantras, only a blank surface at the end, like the final page of a journal. It invites nothing. It resists nothing. That silence is not avoidance, but alignment. That the force, when listened to without demand, reveals more than any doctrine ever could. You leave the sanctum not lighter, not heavier, but more whole. There is no music to follow, no light to chase, just the steady rhythm of your own steps. Returning to the path, now echoing with the quiet clarity of what you've touched. You know the world will try to name you, to push you back into conflict, to offer you the hunger of certainty once more, but you will not need it, because you have walked through the abyss and did not flinch. You have heard the echo and did not run. You have tended the garden and did not grasp, and now, like Vectivus, you are not a storm. You are the stillness that shapes one, the whisper behind power, the presence behind choice. The force moves with you, now not as tool, not as title, unbreakable and quiet. You arrive at a threshold that does not separate place from place, but state from state. There is no gate, no door, only the sensation that something ahead is not meant to be entered as much as it is meant to be received. The air shivers, not from cold, but from concentration and atmosphere, saturated with the remnants of vision. You are no longer walking through a sanctuary built by hands. You are walking into a dream held open by discipline. This was the place where Vectivus welcomed those who arrived not in search of power, but in search of meaning. They came from many paths: Jedi, disillusioned by doctrine; Sith, hollowed by ambition; thinkers who had felt the force stir in quiet corners of their lives. He did not summon them. He did not choose them. He only opened a space, and the force, indifferent to titles, sent them. The corridor ahead is curved like the inside of a spiral shell. You walk it slowly, and the walls pulse faintly with memory. Not sounds, not images, just presence. The residue of conversations spoken softly, of silences held respectfully. This was not a place of conversion. Vectivus never asked others to become like him. He asked only that they become more like themselves. Visitors did not arrive here to be taught. They arrived to unlearn. You pass niches along the wall alcoves, filled not with relics, but with letters, sketches, carved fragments of thought, left behind by those who came and stayed a while. They are not organized, they are not explained, they are simply left open, like windows that once showed someone a piece of themselves. Vectivus understood that visions were not gifts, they were mirrors offered by the Force, not to instruct, but to reflect. He built this place to hold them, not interpret them. You step into the chamber of reverberation, and the moment you do, you feel your breath slow. The floor is smooth, the ceiling open. There are no artifacts, no seats, no scripts, only space. He believed that visions came most clearly when no one was trying to see. And so those who arrived were asked to sit, to rest, to to release the urge for meaning. And in that stillness, the Force would begin to offer impressions, symbolic, personal. Some saw shapes, others feelings. Some heard nothing, and in that silence found exactly what they didn't know they were carrying. You kneel on the polished floor. The space does not hum, it receives. A warmth rises not external, but remembered. A flicker at the edge of thought. A moment you never resolved. A choice you never understood. The Force does not rush to explain. It lingers, like a dream revisiting you in a different form. You remember now why Vectivus refused to write his own interpretations of the visions experienced here. He once said, "A vision borrowed is a wisdom stolen." He trusted that the Force knew who you were better than any teacher ever could. And so, here, you begin to see not clearly, but deeply. The walls around you shift, not in shape, but in mood. They seem to absorb your awareness and reflect it back, not in judgment, but in gentle inquiry. You recall the stories etched in memory. The Jedi Knight who saw a dying tree shedding its bark until only light remained. The Sith defector who saw her own name unravel letter by letter, revealing no core but silence. The child who saw no vision, but cried as if hearing a lullaby sung by the galaxy itself. Each vision was unique, each one true, and none needed translation. Vectivus trusted the Force to speak its own language to each soul. You rise from the floor and feel no urgency. The vision does not leave, it accompanies, like breath, like shadow. The chamber behind you dissolves into the curved corridor once more, and you follow it, now drawn toward the archive of dialogues. This was the place where conversations were recorded not by droid, but by resonance. Every word spoken in true awareness left behind a thread of vibration. These threads, suspended in air like fine glass, can be felt when touched. You reach out now, and one quivers, unfolding into your body like memory. A Jedi asks, "Why do you not fight what is broken?" Vectivus replies, "Because what is broken often speaks most clearly, if we listen." Another thread, "How do you wield the dark without being consumed?" Vectivus, "By ceasing to wield. Let it move through you, and it will pass without possession." These conversations were not debates, they were shared awareness. Visitors came expecting to defend their truths. They left understanding their truths were doorways, not destinations. Vectivus taught through precision, not in correcting, but in holding up the mirror at just the right angle. He never claimed to be right. He claimed only to be listening more closely than most. And in that listening, he helped others hear themselves. You pass now into the chamber of release, a room built for endings, not death, not loss, but the gentle setting down of what no longer serves. Many who came here had been bound by stories too heavy to carry. Vectivus taught them to name those stories, feel their weight, and then let them go without cutting them off. This chamber contains no altars, no flames, only cushions, stones, and a small fountain whose water never overflows. It was here that many wept, not because they were in pain, but because the pain had finally been given permission to be seen. You kneel by the fountain and let your reflection shimmer. You do not see answers. You see yourself, unfiltered. Vectiv. US once said, "Let go, not to be free, but because freedom is what you are when you stop holding." You feel that now. The The tension in your chest softens. The story you have been repeating begins to lose its grip. The force is not pulling, it is clearing. And in that clearing, you feel something awakener, gentleness strong enough to hold the dark, a wisdom humble enough to sit beside grief. You rise, not finished, but softened, not transformed, but attuned. You walk through the final corridor of this space, and the walls begin to lighten, not with lamps or crystals, but with tone. You are returning now, not back to the world, but back to yourself within it. Vectivus never asked anyone to abandon their path. He only asked them to walk it with fuller presence. Many who visited never returned, but not because they were trapped, because they had found the freedom to move forward without running. You reach the end of the spiral and stand before an open threshold. Behind you, a sanctuary of mirrors, visions, and soft undoing. Before you, the wide galaxy still clings to its certainties, but you, now shaped by resonance, no longer need to argue with it. You walk forward with the quiet confidence of one who knows that silence is not surrender. It is sovereignty, and as the path opens ahead, the Force walks beside you, not guiding, not guarding, only witnessing, exactly as he did, exactly as you now will. You step into a wider hall where the air feels less dense, but no less attentive. The quiet here is not passive, it listens, it breathes aloud. This was the core of Vectivus's philosophy, that understanding does not require agreement, that resonance does not need a winner. This is where guests remained for days, sometimes weeks, exploring the philosophy of the Sith without ever drawing on its hunger. For here, the darkness was not provocation, it was invitation. The dark was not defined by conquest, but by depth, and within that depth, you feel yourself loosening once more. You walk past low tables where scripts have been abandoned, touch without taking. The enemy may wear your face in a mirror not meant for violence. Asterisk. Asterisk is the Force. Divided door, is it we who fear its wholeness? These are not Sith teachings as the galaxy remembers them. There are no promises of power, no worship of passion's flame, and you begin to see clearly what others missed. Vectivus was not a rebel within the Sith tradition. He was its forgotten root. He traced darkness not to destruction, but to inquiry. Where others saw the Force as a means to dominate, he saw it as a field to be studied, like soil, like storm, like sorrow. He once explained, anger, left unnamed, becomes cruelty. But anger, understood, becomes compassion with boundaries. In silence, you step into a circular library, its shelves curved like the rings of a tree. Here were stored the dialogues of visitors, long gone. Feel a pulse, each time slight, like a breath drawn in by someone who no longer needs to speak. These are not teachings in the traditional sense. Many end abruptly. Many are written in languages no longer spoken, but all contain the fingerprints of people who sat with their unknowing and chose to document it. You take one at random and open to the middle. A line reads, asterisk, he did not tell me what to do. He simply asked why I thought I needed to dot, asterisk. You close the book and smile faintly. There is no orthodoxy here, no system to follow, just patterns of thought that expand the longer you sit with them. Vectivus believed the Sith could not be redeemed by suppressing their philosophy but by refining its origin. He once wrote, asterisk, the dark is not a curse. It is a question asked so deeply Most are too afraid to answer it. Asterisk, you move now into the chamber of shared presence, a place where Vectivus often sat with his guests, not to instruct, but to feel. No torches, no banners, just cushions placed in the pattern of a spiral, each seat equidistant from the others. The only center is the space between them. Here, guests from across the galaxy-conflicted Jedi, weary Sith, unaffiliated, Force sit in stillness. Sometimes they spoke. The Force itself felt denser here, not heavy, but aware, as if it were drawn into the collective act of listening. You take a seat and close your eyes. Breath, a Togruta healer, breathing through memory, a fallen knight remembering his child's laughter. These are not ghosts. They are not illusions. They are impressions held in the weave of the space. Vectivus allowed them to linger, not warnings, but as reminders. The Force is not just what you draw on. It is what you leave behind. You open your eyes, and in the distance, across the curve of the chamber, you see the impression of Vectivus himself, not as form, not as apparition, but as feeling. A calmness so complete it outlines him like light, without source. He is seated where he always sat, at the edge, never the center, watching, not in judgment, but in joy. For every visitor who found something true enough to carry away, he felt the quiet triumph of truth expanding, not his truth, of a visitor who came with every intent to challenge him, a former inquisitor, sharpened by years of violence. She demanded he explain himself, demanded he prove why he called himself Sith. He replied only, "Why does that word make you angry?" And in her silence, she heard the answer, and that the Force was always larger than its container. He did not shatter systems. Nuance, like someone navigating fog with the memory of stars, and you, now breathing in the subtle gravity of this place, begin to feel how rare that kind of clarity truly is. You rise slowly. There are no lessons to recite, no robes to wear. You carry nothing outward but a resonance, enough stillness to find your own. The corridor ahead opens again to the world. Of this place in your chest, like a low flame, it does not guide, it does not guard. It simply reminds that philosophy is not a weapon. It is a question you are willing to live with, quietly, completely, and forever. You move through the threshold and into the night beyond. Yet the weight of the sanctuary does not lift, it trails. You like a long breath, like a gentle chord, still vibrating beneath the silence. The stars above do not blink with urgency. They are still, watching, as if aware of the shift within you. The Force, now so familiar in its quietude, clings to your ribs, not as possession, but as understanding. That was Vectivus's gift. He did not impose transformation. He allowed it to unfold by refusing to name it. You do not walk away with instructions. There are no monuments, no statues, only weathered stone shaped by the same patience that guided Vectivus's life. Here, beneath the sky, you realize that the architecture of his philosophy did not begin with words. It began with stillness. He built inward first, then outward. He was not the kind of Sith who sought to remake the world. He sought to remove the noise that kept people from truly seeing it. His teachings, if they can be called that, did not ask you to choose between dark and light. They asked you to pause long enough to recognize how often those words lie to you. You pass through a stone arch covered in moss. Words settle into your breath. You do not need to speak loudly, to speak truly. They left with softness in their steps. They left less certain, but more whole. For Vectivus taught that certainty was often just fear with a costume, where the sanctuary ended, but the teachings did not. The wind here carries the scent of damp soil and old stone, but for presence. Vectivus would meet guests here in the early hours, not to guide them, but to listen to what the night had shown them. He believed that insight was a nocturnal creature, quiet and cautious. It approached only when the world stopped insisting on being loud. He never demanded epiphanies. He only offered stillness in which they might find room to emerge. You sit upon a flat stone and close your eyes. Around you, the memory of those nights returns, not as vision, but as atmosphere. What if I am more than the sum of what I've done? What if the dark doesn't demand pain? Without resolution, questions that followed you home, changing everything quietly. Vectivus believed that philosophy should not be something you remembered. It should be something you returned to by accident. A phrase caught in the wind. A silence felt more deeply than before. A question rising in the dark, asking for nothing but attention. He did not want to be quoted. He wanted to be forgotten in the way seeds forget the rain. His presence would linger, not as name, but as habit. The habit of listening before speaking. The habit of pausing before reacting. The habit of letting the force arrive without being summoned. You open your eyes, and the stone beneath you feels warm. You realize it is not warmth from sun or fire. It is the warmth of attention held over years by those who sat here and chose to feel. Vectivus once said, "The force does not reward allegiance. It responds to honesty." That honesty lives in you now, not as concept, but as tone. A low, resonant hum beneath your skin that tells you when you're pretending, when you're posturing, when you've left your own center. You may forget his words, but you will not forget that tone. You rise and begin to walk toward the edge of the clearing. The world beyond is unchanged, but you are not. And so, everything will feel different, not brighter, not darker, just clearer. Vectivus did not teach happiness. He taught clarity, the kind of clarity that allows you to sit beside sorrow and not be dissolved, to stand inside your shadow and not be lost, to listen to the force and not interrupt. At the boundary between the sanctuary and the wild, you see a final marker, no plaque, no symbol, just a hollowed piece of obsidian with a soft indentation where hundreds of hands have touched. You place your palm there and feel the presence of all who came before, not because you must, but because you can. The stone does not respond, it receives, and in that act, it gives you back to yourself. You step beyond the sanctuary, and the force does not follow you. It remains within you, as it always was, as it always will be, and in your silence, the galaxy becomes a little quieter, a little deeper, a little more whole. You stand now at the edge of something vast, not because the landscape has widened, but because your sense of space has changed. The sky before you churns with thick gray clouds, low and brooding, as if the air itself carries memory. Lightning flickers in the distance, not violent but thoughtful, as though the storm is thinking before it speaks. You do not retreat. You walk forward, your steps slow, deliberate. The ground beneath your feet is damp stone, veined with obsidian streaks. And far ahead, half carved into a jagged cliff, rises the final structure Vectivus ever shaped. It is not beautiful. It is not graceful. It is deliberate, designed not to inspire awe, but to hold presence. A sanctuary built not away from the storm, but within it. This place was never meant to be found by those seeking shelter. It was built for those ready to meet the storm and not flinch. The sky does not part above it. The thunder does not grow silent. Here, the storm is welcomed, allowed to surround, to speak in its own tongue. Vectivus chose this location because of its turbulence, because it refused stillness, because the winds howled and the rain never promised to stop. He built within it not to tame the storm, but to understand what it reflected. And you, stepping through its narrow stone archway, are invited into the only kind of peace that matters, the kind that coexists with chaos. The first hall is narrow and windowless, rain drums above you. The stone is cold. The silence here is not comforting, it challenges you. Every echo returns sharper, more insistent. You walk without speaking. You breathe carefully. And the deeper you move, the more you understand. This was never a refuge. It was a mirror. He called this place the coil, not for the shape of its corridors, but for what it does to the soul. Here, every thought coils back on itself. Every belief is questioned by its opposite. The force in this place is not a calm river. It is a spiraling gale pulling from all sides, and yet it does not wish to destroy you, only to see what you are beneath the calm you once mistook for peace. You arrive in the heart of the structura, circular chamber, open to the sky above. Rain falls through the hollow roof and onto a central pool that never overflows. The water ripples constantly. Around the edges of the room are seats carved from the same volcanic stone, smoothed by time and many hours of contemplation. Vectivus called this space the Eye because it sat at the center of the storm and asked only one thing: that you remain, that you do not flee, that you let the noise surround you until you can hear what's underneath it. Here he sat for days without moving, not in meditation, but in observation. He watched his thoughts like clouds. He tracked his fears like lightning strikes. He did not banish them. He charted them. In the storm, he saw his own turbulence, and he taught that those who fear their inner storms will always seek to silence others. But those who sit inside the storm with open hands will never need to dominate. Again, you kneel beside the pool, and the wind rushes through the open roof. Rain patters against your shoulders, and still you do not move. You are beginning to understand. Peace is not the absence of storm. Peace is the ability to remain undisturbed within it. You see now why Vectivus built nothing to shield this room. He wanted the storm to be present, not as threat, but as teacher. He wanted each guest to feel exposed, not to punishment, but to truth. Those who came here expecting comfort often left quickly, but those who stayed found something the galaxy rarely offers: clarity earned through confrontation. Vectivus once said, "To claim mastery over the dark is to sit beside your own thunder and not pretend it is someone else's." This was not a metaphor to him, it was a discipline. And now it is yours. You rise from the pool's edge and walk the inner ring of the chamber. Along the walls are not texts, but grooves deep, spiraling cuts that wind in unpredictable patterns. They are not decoration. They are maps of storms he lived through. Not literal weather, but emotional tempests, grief, rage, shame, sketched out. He etched them into the wall so that others might trace them and feel how chaos can be shaped without being silenced. You place your fingers on one and follow it. The stone feels warmer here, as if each line carries its own rhythm. You close your eyes and feel the thunder within you echo through the groove. You are not resisting the storm now. You are remembering that you are part of it. The path leads you into a smaller chamber, place of fire, low and flickering. Vectivus did not fear fire. He used it not to burn, but to reveal. Here, he brought his most difficult guests, who had built entire identities out of armor, warriors, politicians, exiles. He did not break them. He placed them near the flame and waited. He believed the flame would show them what they truly carried, not scars, but stories. Fire, he taught, does not destroy truth. It destroys pretense. And in its glow, many wept for the first time in years. Sit before the flame now, and you feel it, speaking, not in voice, but in heat. It asks you what you've protected too long, what identity you've mistaken for strength, what pain you've polished into performance. And slowly, gently, you feel it, melting not the truth of you, but the shell. You let it fall. You do not rush to replace it. You sit in the warmth of what remains. And in that warmth, something sacred stirs. The sense that the force is not watching you. It is with you. It has always been, even in the storm. Especially there, you rise again, not with certainty, but with readiness. The wind outside still roars, but it no longer feels like opposition. It feels like breath. You move through the hall again, and the storm greets you like an old companion, wild, honest, unashamed. You walk into it, not to conquer, not to be conquered, but to remain. And the sanctuary behind you stands without doors, because what it offers cannot be locked. The storm remains, but so do you. You return to the center of the coil, not as a wanderer, but as someone who has learned to breathe with the storm rather than brace against it. The rain continues, persistent, yet no longer punishing. The wind roams the hollow corridors with a voice that sounds less like fury and more like memory. You sit again at the circular chamber's edge, just beneath the opening to the sky. And this time, you feel the difference, not in the storm, but in you. The force does not surge here. It circulates, like breath through lungs that no longer tremble. This was what Vectivus meant when he spoke of serenity inside the surge. It was not about removing chaos. It was about no longer fearing it. Darkens as clouds gather above, and flashes of light bloom in the distance, brief and without threat. You remain still. Your breath aligns with the rhythm of the wind. Around you, the grooves in the stone pulse gently, as if responding to your calm. You realize this room was never meant to be visited once. It was meant to be returned to within yourself whenever the outside world insisted on urgency. The coil, as Vectivus built it, was not an escape. It was a template, a memory of how to remain inward while the world spins. Visitors who found this place often expected revelation. Instead, they found reflection. Many came with weapons motional or reland, left them at the door. Not because they were told to, but because the storm would not argue. It would simply mirror. You see now that Vectivus taught not through discipline but demonstration. He never raised his voice. He never imposed his rhythm. He simply sat unmoved until others realized they had been moving too fast to hear themselves. In his stillness, they rediscovered their own. You rise again, this time following a side corridor that coils downward into the deeper levels of the sanctuary. Here, torches flicker softly behind colored stones, casting glows of amber, violet, and blue along the walls. This place is called the Listening Spine, a series of narrow halls designed not to be walked quickly, but felt deeply. Each turn demands a breath. Each corner requires your presence. Along the path are alcoves carved with nothing more than symbols, some ancient, others invented, each one placed where the energy of a thought once settled. You touch one and feel it hum beneath your fingertips, a soundless tone that vibrates through memory rather than hearing. You do not know what it means, but you do not need to. The force speaks through resonance, not language. At the bottom of the descent, you find a single chamber with a large flat stone at its center. No flame, no rain, only the sound of your own breath. This is where Vectivus came to write, not with stylus or datapad, but with intention. He would sit here and let the force move through him, not to record knowledge, but to witness truth. His writings were brief, some only a sentence, some never preserved, for he believed the act of perceiving clearly was more valuable than the act of preserving perception. His philosophy was not built for legacy, it was built for alignment. One phrase remains here, carved into the stone in his hand. It reads, "I am the stillness between waves, not the shore they crash upon." You repeat it softly. It does not ask to be understood, it asks to be lived. And in that asking, you feel the force settle again, this time, not around you, but through you. It does not demand obedience, it welcomes coherence. You understand now why he built this place inside the storm. Because only where the world will not wait do we learn what we truly carry. You rise and begin your ascent again. Each step slower, more grounded. The air thickens as you approach the upper level, where the wind still speaks through open corridors. You emerge again into the Iva Center chamber, open to sky, and this time the storm has changed. The clouds break slightly, letting shafts of pale light pour down through the opening. Rain still falls, but more gently. You step into the light and feel the water trace along your skin, not like intrusion, but like a blessing. The force, once abstract, is now embodied. It walks with you, breathes with you, remains. You return to the fire chamber, where a new warmth meets you. The flames crackle, quiet but alive. The stone around them glows faintly, as if aware of your presence. You sit again, this time not to burn away what no longer serves, but to honor what remains. The self that is not defended, but felt. The self that no longer needs to explain. Vectivus believed that fire was most powerful when it did not seek to consume. He compared it to truth, a warmth that invites without forcing, that asks without accusing. Here, you feel your own truth settle around you like a cloak, adorned, unafraid, and so you sit, not to be still, but because the storm no longer shakes you, because the wind no longer scatters you, because the force is not something to chase, but to harmonize with. You are no longer visitor, you are no longer seeker, you are simply what the storm reveals when it no longer needs to shout. You rise from the warmth of the fire, not because the flame fades, but because something within you has settled. The part of you that once clung to noise, to urgency, to the illusion that peace must be earned through struggle, has loosened its grip. The storm outside still moves. The wind still howls against the edges of the sanctuary. But you no longer brace against it. You walk with it, not above, not beneath. With Vectivus did not build this place to escape the galaxy's chaos. He built it to meet that chaos without flinching. He built it to remember that storms are not enemies, they are. Whether they pass, they reveal, and if you are still enough, they teach. The hallways around you echo with the soft percussion of rain, and with every step, you feel how the force hums through the architecture, not as power, but as presence. It is not instructing you. It is not testing you. It is mirroring you. The walls breathe in rhythm with your quiet awareness. You move now into the upper chamber, where long windows of open air overlook a wind-swept plateau. Here, visitors once stood in silence and watched lightning move across the sky without fear. Here, Vectivus would stand beside them, saying nothing, simply offering the power of non-interference. He believed that most lessons are remembered not because they were spoken, but because they were felt in the company of someone who did not need to change you. The sky rolls above, gray and alive, and you realize this was never about escaping the storm. This was about remembering how to stand in it and still feel whole. You recall the journal fragments found in this very room. A Jedi Master who came here after losing their Padawan, not to recover, but to mourn without armor. A Sith apprentice who left their master's cruelty behind and found in the stillness here a reason to breathe without vengeance. A wanderer with no title who arrived in silence and departed without ever speaking, having written in the sand, "I remembered who I was when I stopped trying to become anything else." You step outside now, onto the rain-wet stone platform. The wind greets you with open arms, not to push you, but to embrace. Lightning splits the sky far in the distance, and you watch it without shrinking. This is not spectacle. This is recognition. Vectivus stood here often. He did not raise his arms to command the storm. He stood with hands open, eyes clear, letting it pass through him like time through stone. He taught that mastery is not control. It is coalescence, the ability to remain intact while the galaxy moves around you like a tide. You breathe in deeply, and the air tastes like clarity. Behind you, the sanctuary waits, not finished, not sealed, but always open. Vectivus did not wall off this place. He designed it to breathe. The stone does not trap the wind. It channels it. The walls do not shield you from the sky. They frame it. He once wrote, asterisk, let the storm shape you, but do not let it name you. Asterisk, those words live in the rhythm of this place, not etched, not recorded, simply present. You feel them now not as guidance, but as invitation. You begin a slow walk along the edge of the platform, your steps tracing the same path Vectivus once walked each morning. He did not begin his days with mantras. He began with listening to the air, to the vibration of the stone, to the unspoken tone of the force. He believed that wisdom came not from accumulation, but from attunement, that the force was not a current to be harnessed, but a chorus to be heard. And in that hearing, you now realize, power softens into grace. You come to the far end of the platform, where a solitary bench faces the horizon. You sit, letting the storm unfold around you without urgency. The sky does not rush, the wind does not beg, the force does not pull. Everything simply is. And in that isness you feel the thread that runs through every teaching Vectivus ever offered, not through words, but through the shape of his silence. He did not fear power. He refused to misuse it. He did not reject the dark. He refused to forget the light. He sat between them like a fulcrum, balancing not because it was easy, but because it was true. Time passes. The rain lessens. The clouds thin. You do not mark the moment of change. It unfolds around you, soft as breath. You realize now that storms do not end. They transform, just as you have. You rise and begin to walk back toward the sanctuary. But this time you do not enter. You place your hand upon the stone arch that marks the boundary, and you leave that moment suspended complete but unclosed. The sanctuary will always be here, not in stone, but in the way you now listen, in the way you pause, in the way you refuse to become the wind that knocks down, and choose instead to be the space it passes through. Vectivus never needed to declare his legacy. He lived it, in still steps across wild stone, in unspoken truths exchanged beside fire, in sanctuaries shaped inside storms so others could remember themselves. And now you, shaped by that quiet design, carry it forward, not as a banner, not as a creed, but as tone, as rhythm, as presence. You step into the world again. The clouds remain. The wind still hums, but so do you. And now you hum in harmony. You come now to the threshold where myth begins to unravel, where the quiet of stone gives way to reflections that do not lie, and where the legacy of Vectivus grows stranger, more intimate, more difficult to name. The path before you is not carved, not paved. It is simply worn, as if many had walked it before you without leaving behind anything but memory. The air carries the scent of minerals and moisture, not the dampness of caves, but the stillness of a place underground that has forgotten the sun. And ahead, at the base of a sloping hill of glassy black rock, lies a structure that does not rise, it sinks. It descends into itself, a temple turned inward. The tomb of mirrors. There is no gate, only a long corridor that stretches downward, carved not for ceremony, but for surrender. The air grows colder, but not harsh. It is the kind of cold that asks you to remove your masks, not the ones you wear for others, the ones you wear for yourself. You descend in silence. The walls begin to shimmer, not with light, with reflection. Subtle, warped, half-seen echoes of your body, your breath, your movement. These are not mirrors meant to flatter. They are fragments curved, angled, fractured, designed to show you not as you appear, but as you shift. You do not pause. The truth here is not given. It is revealed only as you allow it. This place was not built to honor Vectivus. It was built to dismantle him, or rather, the idea of him. He constructed this tomb not as monument, but as test, a final invitation to any who believed they understood him. He called it asterisk, the chamber of undoing. Asterisk. It was here that he removed his own mask, not the literal one. Vectivus never wore symbols, but the deeper one, the self he had constructed even as he taught others to dissolve. He believed no master, no matter how whole, could escape the subtle gravity of identity. And so he returned here again and again to confront the image he feared he might be becoming. You reach the first chamber, a wide circular room with a floor polished into a dark mirror. The ceiling is open to nothing. and the only sound is your breath returning to you. You look down and see yourself, not perfectly, slightly altered. Your posture is heavier, your eyes older. You begin to walk slowly across the room, and each step brings your reflection into new forms, not distorted by malice, shaped by memory. Here, Vectivus stood once and said aloud to himself, "Who am I without the silence? Who am I when I am no longer needed?" This room is not cruel, it is intimate, brutally so. It does not accuse, it reveals. You kneel at the center and feel the force swirl not in power, but in recognition. It does not pull, it does not shield, it reflects. You begin to see the shapes of your intentions, the faces you wore to survive, the half-truths you've called wisdom, not to shame, to clarify. Vectivus called this process honest dissolution, the practice of allowing the self to unravel without retreat. He believed that all beings, no matter how self-aware, constructed stories to hold themselves upright, and that the force, in its most sacred tone, asked only that you stop telling them. You rise and continue into the second chamber, long hall of vertical glass, each pane tuned to reflect not your body, but your memory. The reflections here shimmer with moments you thought were lost, a conversation you regret, a silence you kept when words were needed, a kindness you almost offered. Each reflection shows not what you did, but what lingered, the impact, the echo. Vectivus stood in this hall many times and whispered to the glass, not asking forgiveness, but offering presence. He believed memory was not a chain, it was a mirror, one we are allowed to look into if we stop demanding it be different. You pass through slowly, and your breath begins to deepen. There is no fear here, only softness, and in that softness, something old and heavy begins to lift, not because you have been cleansed, but because you are no longer pretending. You arrive at the final chamber, circular sanctum, lit from beneath by pale blue light. The walls are mirrored obsidian. In the center, a single platform with a mask upon it, smooth, featureless. It was the only item Vectivus ever wore ceremonially. He placed it here, not as a symbol of mastery, but of release. He wore it during his final meditation, not to hide but to step beyond even the face he had come to trust. You approach the mask. You do not touch it. You do not need to. It reflects nothing. It absorbs, and in its presence, you remember that every philosophy, no matter how sincere, becomes costume. If worn too long, Vectivus let go of his name, here not literally, but spiritually. He once said, "When the mask no longer protects, it must be returned." He believed the final act of any seeker was to release even their path, to stand not as a knower, but as a being. You sit beside the mask now, not in reverence, but in recognition. You feel the force around you, not whispering, not teaching, just being. And in that being, you sense something stir inside you that does not need to rise. It does not seek to shine. It simply is. You let go of what you thought you were supposed to be, not to become something else, but to return to what needed no mask to begin with. You rise and leave the chamber, slowly. The reflections along the way shimmer once more. They no longer echo pain. They echo stillness. You ascend the corridor, and the light above grows warmer, not because the world has changed, but because you have emerged from beneath your own shadow. You are not clean, you are clear. Vectivus never promised freedom from darkness. He promised the ability to see within it and not lose yourself. And now, as you stand once more beneath the open sky, you carry no mask, only presence, and that is enough. You walk beneath a sky that seems quieter now, not because the air is still, but because the storm inside you has less to prove. The path behind you curves into memory, but the path ahead is shaped by something stranger: acceptance without finality. You carry no conclusions, only awareness. Vectivus never asked his guests to leave with certainty. He asked them to leave without pretending. And as you approach the next space, deeper within the labyrinth of his mirrored sanctuary, you feel that request resonate not as command, but as invitation. The hallway narrows again, and the floor shifts beneath your feet. From polished stone to soft, shifting crystal dust, each step leaves a mark that fades behind you as quickly as it formed. A reminder that presence cannot be preserved, only practiced. This next chamber is quiet, but not still. The walls pulse gently with a rhythm that matches your heartbeat. Not exactly, slightly slower, as if encouraging you to calm, to slow down, to see. This is Asterisk, the chamber of echoed cells. A space where Vectivus spent his final years in conversation not with others, but with himself, his past versions, his possible futures, his doubts, his convictions. The room is round, and from the center, 8 alcoves branch outward like petals, each housing a figure cloaked in silver, faceless, unmoving. These are not statues. They are constructs, reflections of identity held in 4 stuned crystal, not sentient, not haunted, but infused. Each one a moment when Vectivus might have become something else. You approach the first. Its posture is rigid, arms crossed over its chest, cloak lined with angular threads. The air around it hums faintly with ambition. The version of him who might have sought power through fear, who might have turned knowledge into currency. You stand before it, and it does not accuse. It simply waits, as if asking, Asterisk, can you love even this part of you? You do not recoil. You breathe, then turn to the next. This one kneels, head bowed, hands open. The robe is frayed, the energy soft. The version of him who might have surrendered too early, who might have mistaken peace for silence, who might have fled from pain and called it wisdom. You recognize this shadow too. You've seen it in yourself. You walk to the next, and with each form, something shifts, not outside, but within. You feel yourself soften toward your own becoming. Vectivus built this chamber not to warn, but to welcome. He believed that integration was the only path to wholeness, that denial is what makes a shadow dangerous. You reach the final alcove where no figure stands, only a mirror, full, tall, clear. You walk toward it, and your reflection meets you, not warped, not stylized, simply true. You are not asked to judge what you see, only to witness. This is the part of Vectivus's design most guests never reached. Few had the courage to walk through the echoes. Fewer still understood that the final echo must be your own. You stand in silence, and the force surrounds you, not heavy, not instructive, just present. You realize then that the mirror has no boundary, that its depth is not behind the glass, but within your gaze. It watches you watch yourself, and in that infinite loop, something old begins to dissolve. Not identity, but rigidity. You are still who you are, but you no longer need to be. You return to the center of the chamber, and the constructs pulse softly as you pass. They do not disappear. They remain like tools on a workbench, fallible, understood, no longer in control. This was Vectivus's final discipline, to know all your shapes and choose none of them as armor, to carry them not like weapons, but like poems words that once served you, but no longer define you. Beyond the chamber lies the hall of disappearance. It is not lit, it is not silent, it simply is. A long tunnel carved into the earth, its walls so dark they appear to absorb light. The only thing you see is your own presence, flickering faintly. This was where Vectivus walked every solstice, slowly, alone, allowing himself to vanish, not in death, in ego, in expectations. He believed that to truly live, one must learn to disappear willingly, without drama, without collapse, without need. You walk it now. Your thoughts begin to loosen their grip. Your sense of self fades not in fear, but in peace. You do not become nothing. You become less controlled. You feel how your breathing becomes softer, how your mind no longer reaches for meaning. N at the end of this long dark hall is nothing, and that is the point. No altar, no inscription, no revelation, just the echo of your own quiet. You stand there longer than you thought you could, and in that standing you become aware of something exquisite. You are not the echo, you are the space that holds it. You do not leave the hall. You emerge from it, slowly, back into the reflected light of the first chamber. But you are no longer reflecting the same self. Something subtle has shifted, like water that has found a deeper riverbed. You are still you, but your outline has softened. You are more aware now of the space between thoughts, the silence between identities, the presence beneath performance. Vectivus did not build this tomb to hide, he built it to unveil. And now that you have walked it not as a tourist, but as a witness, you carry what he carried. Not philosophy, not title. Stillness. Presence. Permission to no longer pretend. You leave the chamber without hurry. The stone closes behind you, not with finality, but with gratitude. And outside, the sky receives you, not brighter, not louder, just more clearly, as if it, too, has nothing left to prove. You walk on. Without mask. Without apology, with peace. You walk now not as one who searches, but as one who has seen. The ground beneath your feet is no longer just stone, it is a surface that reflects nothing and welcomes everything. The wind brushes past your cheek, like memory, soft and unfixed. You feel no need to recount where you've been, for the journey through the tomb of mirrors was not a tale to be told. It was a truth to be touched, a dismantling you agreed to undergo. And now, on the far edge of this reflective sanctuary, you feel no triumph. You feel simplicity, weightless, real, the kind of real that does not require defense. Ahead lies a final space, open, windblown, and without walls. Not a room, but a threshold. Not built, but chosen. This place has no name. Vectivus never wrote about it. He never marked it on maps or referenced it in memory. But those who passed through the tomb, those who walked the spiral inward and returned through shadowy, arrived here. It is not sacred. It is not secret. It is only space. But that, in the end, is the most sacred thing of all. You step forward. The light here is diffused, silver like the edge of dawn. The wind does not push or carry, it simply moves, and you move with it. There is a bench carved into the stone, not centered, not symmetrical, just present. You sit without thinking. There is no prompt, no ritual, only time. And so you breathe in, out. You do not meditate. You do not reach for the force. You allow it to find you. It moves into your chest without effort, curling between your ribs like a sound too soft for language. And you realize this is what Vectivus meant when he said, *, the final step is not disappearance. It is transparency, *, to be seen not as mask, not as idea, but as tone, as breath, as rhythm that does not seek to change anything, yet changes all it touches. Here, in this unnamed space, visitors would sometimes leave small objects, not offerings, not relics, just pieces of themselves. They no longer needed a ring, a broken chain, a piece of worn cloth. Vectivus never collected them. He let the wind carry them away, one grain of ash at a time. You place nothing, not because you lack something to leave, but because what needed to be released has already faded within you. There is nothing more to remove, nothing more to hold. You look to the sky, and in that wide openness you see no signs, no symbols, only the vastness you once feared. And now it feels like home. You remember how Vectivus taught not with lessons, but with space, not with answers, but with presence. He understood that the force, in its most complete form, was not a doctrine or discipline. It was the choice to feel fully, to perceive without needing to frame. And in that choice, peace did not arrive like a gift. It unfolded like something you had always carried but never trusted. You stand again, slowly, not because the moment has ended, but because it has finished settling into you. The wind swirls, and you feel it move through your clothing, your hair, your breath. It does not cleanse, it confirms. You are ready, not to act, not to lead, but to exist clearly, quietly, and without the need for further explanation. You descend a narrow path that bends away from the tomb. No guards, no gates, no final inscriptions, just the way down and the world waiting. The trail leads through low grass, through stones covered in soft lichen. You hear birds in the distance, though none appear. The world is not welcoming you back. It never turned you away, but you hear it differently now. You hear its silence more fully. You sense its aliveness as more than movement. The force does not rush to greet you. It aligns with your pace. Enough to be met, you reach the end of the trail, where an old tree leans against the slope. It is gnarled and half hollow, yet vibrant. Beneath it, a small inscription barely visible in the stone. *, there is no end to the self, only the places where we stop pretending we know it. *, you smile, not with your mouth, but with your breath. You do not pause to contemplate. You simply place your hand upon the bark of the tree, and in that touch, everything quiets again. You leave without ceremony. The sanctuary does not close behind you. It does not need to. It lives now not in stone, but in your spine. The path you walk next is not new. It is simply more visible. You do not need to teach what you've seen. You do not need to tell your story. The force will move through your stillness the way light moves across glass silent, revealing whole. And Vectivus, that maskless master, will remain not as legend, but as rhythm, as the breath between your thoughts, as the presence that no longer needs a name. You walk forward, and the world continues, as do you. You awaken before you open your eyes. The force stirs within you like a tide, no longer restrained by shoreline or storm. There is no beginning here, only continuation, an echo of breath, a memory of silence folding in on itself. Around you, the air is thick with dusk, the kind of half-light that precedes not nightfall, but revelation. The sky above is painted with the early shadows of an eclipse. Not sudden, not violent. A slow descent of shade, as if the stars themselves have chosen to dim in reverence. This is where it ends. Not the galaxy, not time, but the path Vectivus once walked, the path you now carry within. The location is nameless. It was never built. It was discovered. A hollow in the fabric of the world, hidden between forgotten ridgelines and soundless lakes, where the force thins into something older than division. This is where he came in his final season, not to die, not to vanish, but to unwrite himself gently. He did not leave behind a grave. He left behind a question. Asterisk, what remains when no one remembers your shape? And now you stand in the soft hush of that question, not to answer it, but to listen. The path is not marked. There are no torches, only a natural slope of earth that spirals downward, traced with veins of obsidian and pale moss. The wind here is softer than breath. The trees do not whisper. They observe. Every step you take is met with quiet, not emptiness attention. The force is not pulsing. It is holding you. Light fades, and you do not fear it. You descend without resistance, without urgency. You are not entering a tomb. You are returning to a moment that has always been waiting. At the center of the spiral is a field of stone, wide and flat, its edges lost in fog. The ground pulses with heat, not fire, but memory. Here, Vectivus walked in silence for days, tracing no pattern, following no ritual. He believed the force, in its final truth, could only be heard once the self was soft enough to dissolve. He did not seek transcendence. He sought honesty. He stood beneath the eclipsing sun and let the light fade from his outline until he was no longer shadow, no longer form-only presence. You step into that same field, and the world narrows, not into confinement, but into intimacy. You feel your thoughts drift, unmoored, not lost, released. Regrets loosen, desires quiet. The questions that once hunted you lie down, not answered, but accepted. Vectivus called this sensation the unraveling peace, not peace as resolution, but as permission to stop clinging. The field beneath your feet responds to your stillness. It does not glow. It does not speak. It simply holds you like soil holds root, like water holds moonlight. You begin to walk not to arrive, but to remember movement without purpose. And then, without warning, the eclipse begins. The sky darkens in degrees. The wind slows. Shadows lengthen without edge. But there is no fear, only reverence. You pause at the center of the field and look upward. The sun contracts behind the descending veil, and for a moment, everything becomes pause, time, sound, breath. You feel the force surge, but not in power. In clarity, it becomes total. It becomes plain. It becomes real in a way that no teaching, no meditation, no philosophy could describe. You do not reach for it. You do not channel it. You simply are it, and then you feel him, not as ghost, not as voice, as awareness, a familiar shape in the silence, not above you, not beside you, within the field, within the fog, within the breath, now soft in your chest. Vectivus does not greet you, he does not appear, he resonates. You feel the exact tone of his presence, measured, unhurried, not inviting you to follow, but to realize you have already arrived. He left no monument here, only the act of release, no last words, only the rhythm of breath that did not need to be heard. And now, as the eclipse reaches its center, as the last line of sunlight dissolves behind shadow, you close your eyes not in surrender, but in recognition. You are not becoming him, are becoming like him, not in thought, in tone, in the way your presence hums when nothing else remains. The Force does not reward this moment. It does not mark it, but it remembers it. You sit now at the heart of the field. There is no light above, no form beside, but you are not alone. The entire galaxy breathes with you now, quietly, as if cradling its own heartbeat for the first time. You understand what he meant when he wrote, when the stars are gone. We remember that we are the light we feared to hold. You feel that light not blazing, not bright, gentle, rooted, complete. You will leave this place, not today, not soon, but eventually. You will carry this echo into the world again. You will speak less and mean more. You will act not to prove, but to harmonize. You will no longer seek silence. You will be it. And when others look at you with questions you once asked yourself, you will not answer. You will listen. The eclipse will pass. The light will return, but something in you will not. Something in you has become the quiet Vectivus left behind. The final thought, the breath before the ending, the truth that does not need to be told, only lived. You do not rise at first. The field of stone beneath you is warm now, not from the light above still veiled in eclipse, but from within, from the presence that has settled around your breath like woven silk. The Force hums through your skin in the way wind hums through trees, without demand, without edge. You sit there, eyes closed, body still, until you feel the moment shift, not end, just shift. A tide within you turns, so gently it does not disturb, and the realization moves through you like dawn through fog. You are no longer waiting for anything. Not answers, not signs. You are no longer seeking. You are no longer avoiding. You are simply here. When you rise, it is not dramatic. It is not ceremony. It is continuation. Each step forward feels less like walking and more like returning to a rhythm your bones once knew but forgot. The path curls gently toward the outer ring of the stone field. Fog still lingers. The sky remains hushed, but you begin to see other forms in the distance, seated, standing, moving slowly. You are not alone. Others have come here before, some long ago, some perhaps only recently. There are no greetings, no questions, only shared stillness. You pass near a woman kneeling beside a bowl of water, her hand hovering above it without touch. She does not speak. Her presence does. It vibrates like yours, quiet and clean. You understand now what Vectivus hoped this place would become, a convergence of those who no longer wished to convince. You enter a new space, a grove grown naturally along the spiral path beyond the stone. Trees rise tall and silver-barked, their leaves whispering like gentle bells when the wind brushes them. Here, Vectivus is said to have walked often not for reflection, but for digestion. He knew that the greatest clarity must be walked through the body, not just the mind. He taught that revelation was not the end of something, but the beginning of embodiment. So he walked slowly among these trees, allowing the insight of stillness to settle not as knowledge, but as rhythm. You do the same now, your steps light, your gaze soft. You touch nothing, everything touches you. Beneath one tree lies a worn stone, barely noticeable. Carved into its side is a simple line, carry nothing but your tone. You sit beside it and feel the weight of what you've shed. Not loss, unburdening the expectations you once wore like armor. The urgency you once confused for purpose. The fear you once misnamed as power. All of it released now, not because it was wrong, but because it was finished. You are not empty. You are uncluttered. Vectivus believed this was the final form of power, not dominance, not detachment, but density, the kind of presence so full of awareness that nothing artificial can cling to it. You rise again and walk toward the northern edge of the grove, where the land slopes downward into a low valley filled with tall grass and slow-moving mist. There is a platform here round, low, polished to a soft shimmer. Around it, 8 smooth stones placed at equidistant points, each a different hue. This is the circle of witnessing. Not a place for others to see you, a place for you to see yourself within the whole. Here, Vectivus sat when he felt the pull of legacy rising in him like hunger, when he feared his clarity would become pride, when he needed to be reminded that the Force does not remember names, only resonance. Your seat on one of the stones, the mist curls around your legs, like thought returning to its source. Across from you, another figure sits, eyes closed. You do not know their name. You do not need to. Their silence meets yours. And in that intersection, you feel the gentle truth that has lived beneath all others. There is no arrival, only unfolding. You sit there together, not in unity of belief, but in parallel clarity. The Force does not speak here. It breathes, it lingers, it listens. You do not know how long you remain. Time has no rhythm here. Eventually, the other figure stands and walks slowly into the mist, not away, not toward, just deeper. You do the same. Your body feels lighter now, but your feet feel more rooted. You have not ascended, you have grounded. This was Vectivus's secret. He never sought ascension. He sought anchoring. And now, with each step through the tall grass, you understand what that means. The final structure on this path is not a temple. It is a dwelling. Low, curved, made of stone and living bark, grown rather than built. It holds no power. It holds quiet. Inside, there is a circle of cushions, a low table, a place for fire. This is where Vectivus once sat with those who had completed the spiral. Not to teach, to share tea. No robes, no titles, no roles, just presence, shared freely. You sit where he once sat. You pour water into a carved cup and hold it in both hands. You feel its warmth. You drink, not for need, but for remembrance. To remember that the simplest acts, when done with presence, are sacred. He left no final sermon, no closing, right? Only a note etched into the underside of the table. Asterisk, the Force is not mine, but I belonged to it fully. Asterisk, you close your eyes and feel those words settle into you like gravity. There is no closure, there is only absorption. You are no longer interpreting, you are embodying, not perfectly, not permanently, but truly. You leave the dwelling and find that the eclipse has begun to pass. A sliver of light edges the sky. Birds begin to stir. The mist begins to thin. The path before you is clearer now, but you no longer walk it to reach. You walk it to return. And as you move forward, the force moves with you, not behind, not beneath, but within, soft, whole, and quiet. You descend the final hill with no sense of farewell. There is nothing in you that clings. The path you've walked does not close behind you, it remains open, not as trail but as tone, humming softly within the soles of your feet. The eclipse has lifted now, but you do not rush to greet the light. It meets you like an old friend, familiar, quiet, and changed. The grass glistens with the dew of stillness. The air tastes like memory. And above you, the sky no longer promises clarity, it simply is. You are not returning to the galaxy. You are bringing it into sharper focus by the way you now move through it. There is no marker that says you have completed the journey. Only the way the wind folds around your body without interruption. Ahead lies an overlook carved naturally into the cliffside, facing a sea so wide its horizon fades into haze. The waves below roll with rhythmic grace, and you know without needing to know that Vectivus stood here often in his last days, not to contemplate, not to prepare, but simply to witness. He believed there was a kind of power in bearing silent witness to beauty that asked for nothing in return. You approach the edge and sit, your legs folded, your hands resting gently on your knees. The sun is rising again, the world is still turning, and for the first time you feel that your stillness does not resist that motion. It belongs to it. You do not meditate, you remember, not in detail, but in tone. The storm-wrapped sanctuaries, the listening halls, the mirrored tomb, the unguarded silences, all the places you walked where Vectivus once breathed. They do not form a story, they form a resonance. You feel them not like chapters, but like a chord, one sustained note across years and stone and breath. You hear it now inside yourself, and you understand this was never about his legacy, it was about presence. His presence was a blueprint not for what to become, but how to dissolve. And you, having dissolved again and again, rise not brighter, but deeper. The sea speaks in rhythm, a voice without language. It tells you nothing, but it reminds you of everything. That the force is not your story. It is the space that holds it. That you are not its wielder. You are its witness. And perhaps that is what Vectivus understood more than any who came before or after. That the ultimate gift of the force is not control. It is participation without attachment. To be part of the tide, not to command it. To shape with humility. To observe with courage. To remain. You stand now, and behind you the hill still hums with the lives that have passed through. You know that others will come, not many, only those who no longer need direction, only those willing to stand in a place that asks nothing but honesty. You do not need to return here, it returns with you. In the way your voice quiets before responding, in the way you pause before choosing, in the way you begin to treat each moment not as task, but as threshold. As you walk down from the overlook, you pass a single stone, round and smooth, placed deliberately beside the path. It bears no inscription, no message, only a line, so faint, it is almost missed. He disappeared. Well, you stop, not because of sadness, but because of truth. There is a kind of disappearance that is not erasure, it is completion. Vectivus did not vanish. He became tone, and that tone remains in every space that honors stillness, every hand that releases instead of grasps, every act done with awareness instead of expectation. The sun warms your back as the trail leads into the forest again, but the path no longer curves, it opens, the world widens, and you walk not to arrive, not to explain, but to integrate. You are not the bearer of his teachings. You are their continuation, not through words, through breath, through restraint, through subtle presence, through the decision not to add noise when silence will deepen understanding. There is no final realization, no crest of truth, only the widening of vision, the softening of certainty. You carry no map, you need none. The force moves with you now, not as a current beneath your feet, but as a rhythm behind your choices. You will not always speak it, you will not always remember it, but it will find you in firelight, in solitude, in the way you forgive yourself again and again for forgetting, and return gently each time you reach the edge of the grove, where the trail gives way to the open world. Cities shimmer far off, life pulses, bright and unaware. You smile not because you are separate from it, but because you no longer need to prove you belong. The journey was never about retreat, it was about preparing to return differently. You step into the morning not with purpose, but with presence. And behind you, the sanctuary Vectivus built begins to fade, not from view, but into you. You are not a master. You are not a seeker. You are simply still. And in that stillness, the force breathes again, soft, unclaimed, and whole.